I want to bring in Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and President of the Washington Strategy Group. Talk to us about the significance of these latest sanctions. What difference do you think that they'll ultimately make?
Yeah, Jill, thank you for having me this morning. These sanctions are sending a strong signal to Vladimir Putin and to Russia that this is a different administration. This is not Donald Trump's administration any longer, that the United States is not going to passively accept Russian aggression into our elections, for example, and that we're also going to stand up regarding Ukraine and other issues that come about related to U.S.-Russia bilateral affairs. And this is something that I think is hard for Vladimir Putin to accept. We've seen Russia lash out despite the fact that they were aggressing into our politics. And I think that President Biden is very wide open, clear-eyed, and has his eyes wide open about Russia.
Financial sanctions haven't really worked before against Russia. Why is there a thinking that this could be different?
I guess it really depends on the question of the objective here. Now, in terms of working, we saw Russia in many ways meddle in our elections to try to loosen up the Magnitsky sanctions, which were imposed as a result of Russia's human rights violations, as a result of their invasion into Ukraine and Crimea. And that has hit Russia hard. That has hit Vladimir Putin hard. And that has been a source of friction that even Donald Trump couldn't get lifted. And I think we're watching a long slog in this diplomatic process. This administration is definitely looking at the long term in terms of its pressure campaign about Russia to try to get Russia to change its behavior. It's not like there's a military solution that can be used regarding Russia. The nuclear weapons are in the background, of course, but that's also not on the plate. So other forms of pressure, and the sanctions pressure is significant in terms of impacting Russia. It doesn't mean we've gotten them to change behavior just yet on some of these harder issues, but certainly it's causing some pain.
It was reported that President Biden and Putin perhaps planning some sort of summit for later this year. Do you think that that's actually going to happen? And what would be the goal of that?
I mean, it's one of these interesting paradoxes of American-Russian relations. And this goes back to Soviet days when in the 70s, during the Cold War, we would argue about dominance, global dominance, and nuclear weapons, but then have a Helsinki dialogue about human rights. And I think that's a very realistic approach to dealing with Russia. So President Biden, on the one hand, calls Vladimir Putin a killer and then says, but let's discuss nuclear arms control. And early in his administration, I know it's amazing. We saw the agreement between our two countries, or these two countries, on extending the New START nuclear weapons treaty. So while they're jousting about, they still are getting agreements done. Afghanistan is a major issue. The Iran nuclear talks are a major issue. They have significant security impacts on Russia. And so I think we're going to see a realistic discussion about that while there's still this political sniping and arguing about election interference and Ukraine and sanctions.
In terms of just what Russia's done, you mentioned a military conflict not really on the table here. But when you look at interference in the U.S. election in 2016 and the damage that caused in terms of the partisanship in this country, and then you look at the Solarwinds hack, and I don't think we even know the damage of that entirely at this point. Hasn't Russia been pretty successful in terms of whatever they've been doing, not militarily, but their strategy towards the U.S.?
Yeah, cybersecurity is clearly the new frontier of conflict between states, and we have taken shots from Russia. We have definitively suffered from their cyber attacks and hacks, and the Solarwinds hack, which is the immediate cause of the new round of sanctions in 2020. That was impactful, but also there were many efforts by Russia to impact our elections that the FBI and Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, talked about publicly around that time of the election, said that we were rebuffing. So I don't think this is the end of it. I think there are a lot of things that are going to happen that we're never going to see or hear about that are going to be briefed to Congress behind closed doors. But certainly our cyber defenses have taken a bit of a beating over the last number of years. And there was one interesting line as well. I think it's worth mentioning in the Treasury Department statement when announcing the sanctions last night, which was creating a direct link between Konstantin Kilmanek and the Trump campaign, and then his carrying information from the Trump campaign strategy to his handlers in Moscow, and creating a direct link that was in the press release. That link was a new angle. So I think that essentially opens up more discussion about Russia's meddling and its cyber intelligence capabilities and how we're going to have to deal with it.
Really fascinating. Quickly, Russia saying that there will be some type of response. No details, though, on what it will be. What type of response or retaliation might Russia take?
So the challenge here is that we are passing by each other in terms of our response and their response. We're looking at sanctions. They're amassing troops. At the border with Ukraine at a level not seen since 2014. So the concern would be that they decide to make moves militarily into Ukraine and challenge us in a way that we would then have to figure out how to respond. How do we support potentially Ukraine with military supply? And those are very dicey, tricky dynamics. As far as impacting the United States directly, they've shown us what they want to do. They've been attacking us already. I think we're responding to their aggression, but I think there are third-party avenues that they could take that would make policymaking very complicated for us.
All right, great insight and perspective. Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and President of the Washington Strategy Group. Thanks for coming on.